Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the Trap of Cannae, Hannibal's masterpiece. Let's jump right in and see exactly how this devastating psychological trap was engineered. So, picture this. It's the summer of 216 BC, and Rome is just completely paralyzed by terror. Reports of these bizarre omens are flooding in. We're talking a shower of stones, lightning strikes taking men out right in the Campus Martius, and statues of the gods that literally seem to be sweating blood. But these superstitions weren't just coming out of thin air. They were born from a very real, very physical nightmare. The Romans were reeling from a string of absolutely humiliating military defeats right on their own soil, all at the hands of the Carthaginian general Hannibal. Was the Roman Republic doomed? Think about that for a second. Imagine the absolute superpower of your known world suddenly realizing it might actually just get wiped off the map. The Republic wasn't just fighting a tough war anymore. They were quite literally fighting for their survival. Hannibal had outwitted them at every single turn. He was using their own landscape against them and totally exploiting the reckless, glory-seeking nature of Roman commanders. It got to the point where the Senate genuinely feared the complete destruction of the Republic. They were literally wondering if the gods themselves were sending a message of impending doom for the Roman she-wolves. But, Rome didn't just sit back and panic. They actually launched a massive, multi-front counteroffensive. The goal was to systematically dismantle the four pillars of Hannibal's power: reclaim Italic allies in the south, cut off silver and manpower in Iberia, disrupt political support in Carthage, and neutralize Gallic allies in the north. But the absolute most important theater? That was right in their backyard, the south. To crush Hannibal directly and get those Italian allies back, Rome assembled its largest land force ever. We're talking an unprecedented 89,000 soldiers taking the field. Now here's the catch. This colossal Roman army had a massive, fatal flaw built right in. It was completely crippled by a divided command structure, because, as was tradition, they split the command between two consuls, who took turns leading the army on alternate days. On one hand, you've got Aemilius Paulus, a highly cautious, experienced veteran who basically smelled danger at every turn. And on the other, Terentius Varro, a homo novus, or new man, younger, super impetuous, and fiercely hungry for glory. It's a classic clash of personalities, and honestly, Hannibal understood this friction perfectly. He knew exactly which man he wanted to pick a fight with. Let's look at the timeline, because Hannibal played this brilliantly. Over the course of a sweltering week in July, he waged this brutal psychological campaign just to push the impatient Varro right past his breaking point. First, he sets up a fake camp trap to lure them into an ambush, but Pallas steps in and wisely stops the looting. Then, on August 1st, Hannibal turns up the heat, literally. He sends swift Numidian riders to harass the thirsty Roman watering parties. It was just absolute agony under the scorching summer sun. Finally, by August 2nd, Varro absolutely snapped. It was his day to command, he was enraged, and he aggressively drew up the battle lines, totally determined to smash the Carthaginians once and for all. This brings us to the Carthaginian crescent. Outnumbered 2-1, Hannibal simply couldn't fight a traditional battle. So instead, he deploys his forces into this bizarre, bulging, convex shape pointing right at the Romans. He stacks his Iberian and Gallic infantry right in this bulging center. But the absolute genius of this move was on the edges. He hid his elite Libyan heavy infantry in deep columns right behind the edges of the crescent. And get this, they were equipped in armor previously looted from dead Romans. To make it even better for Hannibal, there was an intense southerly wind blowing blinding clouds of dust directly into the Romans' faces, completely hiding the trap. And here's how the perfect encirclement played out. The Romans massed their heavy infantry into a massive, dense fist, aiming to just punch right through that bulging Carthaginian center. But as that Roman fist charged, the Carthaginian center intentionally yielded. It didn't break, mind you. It inverted. As the Romans pushed violently forward, baying for blood, the convex crescent slowly turned concave. The Romans, sensing a totally false victory, unwittingly wedged their massive army deeper and deeper into this pocket, packing themselves tighter and tighter together. Now, while that infantry trap was being laid in the center, there was a brutal deception unfolding on the Roman left wing. The perfidious trap. 500 Numidian riders suddenly ride right up to the Romans and fake a defection, literally throwing down their weapons. The Romans, thinking they've caught a break, accept them and send them to the rear. But once they were behind the lines, the Numidians pulled out concealed swords and violently hacked at the hamstrings of the Roman horses from behind. Total panic erupted. Caught between betrayal and the enemy front, the Roman cavalry broke and fled, and Consul Varro actually ended up abandoning the battlefield entirely. With the Roman cavalry totally driven off the field, the trap snaps shut. The fist is crushed. Those hidden Libyan columns we mentioned earlier, they suddenly wheel inward, striking both Roman flanks at the exact same time. Then, the Carthaginian cavalry returns to seal the rear. Suddenly, the Romans aren't punching through a weak line. They are completely surrounded by 3 walls of disciplined killers. That massive Roman fist was compressed into a claustrophobic, amorphous heap of desperate men. I mean, imagine being in that formation. They were packed so incredibly tightly together, they literally couldn't even raise their weapons to defend themselves. It was just a one-sided slaughter, and amidst all this horrific chaos, the cautious consul Paulus, the very man who had warned against fighting this battle in the first place, refused to run. Even though he was severely wounded and covered in blood, when a tribune offered him a horse to escape, Paulus declined. Instead, he used his dying breaths to issue a final command. "Waste not an unavailing pity. Go, and tell the senators in public session to fortify the city of Rome." He wanted them to prepare before Hannibal arrived, choosing to breathe his last right there amidst his slaughtered soldiers. The sheer scale of the carnage that afternoon is honestly almost impossible to wrap your head around. As the trap tightened without any respite, a staggering 70,000 Roman and Allied soldiers were systematically slaughtered in a single afternoon. Let that sink in. Out of an army of nearly 90,000, only a tiny fraction actually managed to escape. Almost every single family in Italy would mourn the loss of a husband, a father, a son, or a brother on that awful day.
And it wasn't just the rank and file taking the hit. 80 Roman senators were left dead in the Apulian dust. Alongside them lay 29 tribunes, former dictatorial commanders, and both proconsuls. In literally one single afternoon, a massive chunk of Rome's entire governing body was simply wiped out of existence.
When the sun rose the next morning, even the victorious Carthaginians were deeply shocked by what they saw. The Roman desperation was entirely visceral. Livy recounts that they found dead Romans who had actually dug holes in the dirt to suffocate themselves rather than be captured. But perhaps the most horrifying detail of all was a Roman soldier who, unable to use his hands in that crushing press of bodies, had expired in a sheer frenzy of rage, literally tearing off a Numidian soldier's face with his teeth. It's just unbelievably brutal. That singular, feral act of dying defiance really perfectly encapsulated the Roman spirit, don't you think? Even completely trapped, even completely destroyed, they were never, ever going to surrender. Which leaves us with a truly fascinating question. Having lost their army, their leaders, and a massive portion of their fighting-age men in a single afternoon, how could the Roman Republic possibly survive? How does a broken nation rise back up from its darkest moment, like a phoenix from the absolute ashes of Cannae? Well, that incredible resilience is something we'll have to explore next time. Until then, remember that even the most perfect trap leaves a totally changed world in its wake.